Great. Go team.
Woohoo.
All right.
So I have a countdown clock over here on my extra window. So we got 25 seconds.
Great. Do your final stretch.
Yeah. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go.
Great. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. We are going to give you all just a moment to get settled. I know you just came in from the waiting room.
Oh, Gretchen.
Yeah. If you can just take a moment to mute yourselves as well as you all come in here. I'm going to go through a few logistics in just a moment, but letting everybody just get settled, recognizing you've had a full day since coming here. So feel free to just take a moment to get settled. Pull up your chat. We will be using the chat function throughout the course of this meeting. And I'll go ahead and get started in just a couple of moments here. Great. I know a few folks are going to keep trickling in here, but we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here. You'll see on the screen that this meeting is being recorded. It's being recorded. We're going to be recording the whole meeting, but we'll edit the recording to delete the discussion section before putting it up on the website. And so really the intent of recording this meeting is to enable those that weren't able to join either the afternoon session, we had a session at noon, or this session, and providing them with the opportunity to hear the presentation. So wanting to notify everybody of that. And this is a formal welcome to the Edmonds Stormwater Planning Workshop. We have an hour with you all from 6 to 7 p.m. and a lot to cover. Also a lot of opportunity to hear from you all as well. As I mentioned, this is one of 2 workshops with the same content. So we also had a workshop from 12 to 1 o'clock this afternoon, where we walked through the same slides and solicited the same input that we'll be asking you all to provide input on this evening. So with that, before we dive right in and do a walkthrough of the agenda, before we introduce the project team, I do just want to formally welcome you all to this workshop and thank you all so much for being here and carving time out of your evening to be with us. I'm going to walk through just a couple of Zoom logistics, since I know in this remote space, sometimes we're on Teams, sometimes we're on Zoom, and just to reorient everybody to the platform that we'll be using tonight, which is Zoom. So for a refresher for everybody, using your computer to connect to Zoom is definitely the most reliable way. So if you do have a computer versus your phone, but either way, we're excited that you're here. Also, using the chat function to submit questions and comments. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout the next hour with you all. And at any time, if you have a clarifying question, if you have a reflection that you'd like to share with the group, please feel free to put that in the chat. Also, we found using your headset or taking the call from a quiet space, remaining muted as well throughout the course of our time tonight together, just to minimize background noise in case others are having some audio challenges with their connectivity. So wanting to make this as accessible as possible and recognizing that we're all in this together. So please keeping yourselves muted over the course of the hour together, but at any and all times using that chat function to share any thoughts you might have, to answer any prompts that we have as well. In case any tech issues do arise, we have Brent Edgar, who's on the line here, and Rebecca in just a moment is going to be dropping both his email address as well as his phone number in the chat here. So any and all tech questions, not life tech questions, but tech questions over the next hour, please don't hesitate to reach out to him. He's there to help you with any connectivity issues, any user issues. We definitely don't want the Zoom platform to be a barrier to your participation, your active participation over the next hour with us. So a quick introduction to who I am before I turn it over to Pat Johnson, Gretchen Muller with Cascadia Consulting Group, and helping to support the team with facilitation of these online workshops. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Pat.
Thanks, Gretchen. I am Patrick Johnson. I am the City of Edmonds Stormwater Engineering Technician, and I've been heading this process up with my other colleague who's on the call tonight. It's Jerry Schuster, who is the City of Edmonds Stormwater Engineer. And yeah, we've been running this project for about a year now.
Over to you, Rebecca.
All right, I'm Rebecca Dugopolsky with Herrera Environmental Consultants, and I'm an associate engineer there, and also been the project manager on this effort from the consultant side. And I've been working with the City of Edmonds on various projects over the last several years, a variety of different things, and been working on this project with Pat and Jerry over the past year, and excited to give you an update on where we're at. And I'll pass things off to Mindy, who's been leading up our technical team and will be doing most of the presentation today.
I'm Mindy Pone with Herrera, and I've been working with Edmonds for the last year as a technical lead on this project, and look forward to presenting the information that we have for you today. And I'll return it back to Gretchen.
Great. Thank you so much, Mindy. Okay, so with that, turning it back over to Patrick for opening remarks.
Thank you again. So I just wanted to open by saying thank you to everyone for joining us today as we discuss kind of some environmental planning aspects of Edmonds as we look into the future. For today, however, the focus is going to be on the Parentfield Creek watershed. So these assessment and prioritization permit documents that will be discussed today, they do look to the future, and they're going to help inform and direct the full update to the City of Edmonds Stormwater Comprehensive Plan. So this is just a small piece of the comprehensive plan that we'll be discussing today. So what is the comprehensive plan? So simply, the City of Edmonds Stormwater Comprehensive Plan identifies and proposes solutions to the known flooding, water quality, and habitat problems Edmonds has. It details the actions necessary to ensure compliance with applicable federal, state, and local requirements, especially the Western Washington Phase 2 municipal stormwater permit. In addition, the comprehensive plan serves as a City of Edmonds Public Works operations and maintenance plan. It's also a capital improvement plan and a financial plan for the city. So this separate and larger holistic plan is expected to have a longer timeline to develop, which is currently underdeveloped, and it's being reviewed in hopes of kind of finalizing it 2023, 2024. And during that process, there will be another separate sort of public workshop process, just like this one, when it comes to discuss that. So I just wanted to make the distinction between what we're talking to tonight and what is larger coming down the pipeline. So with that clarification, I'd like to pass it to Rebecca.
I'm actually going to quickly go over the agenda and the goals for the workshop, and then we'll pass it over to Rebecca. So we're almost there.
Thank you.
Yeah, keeping everybody on our toes. So we've got a few agenda items for you all. And as we mentioned, throughout the course of this, any clarifying questions throughout the presentation portion of this before the Q&A, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring chat throughout the course of our time with you all. So in just a couple of moments here, we'll be turning it over to Rebecca for the project background and schedule. So what is this project? What are the core elements? Where are we in the overall timeline for the project? Rebecca will then be turning it over to Mindy to share with you all and walk through the identified actions that have been identified so far. And then we'll be opening it up for formal Q&A discussion. We've got a couple of prompting questions during that Q&A portion as well. And as I mentioned, but really just wanting to emphasize, we will be monitoring the chat throughout. So please do not hesitate to put any and all clarifying questions, comments, reflections in the chat throughout the presentation. So a few overarching workshop goals. So as I mentioned, Rebecca will be sharing a brief description of the project and schedule, just walking through a couple of slides there. Then she'll be turning it over to Mindy, who will walk through many of the remaining bullets on these workshop goals. So review of the watershed inventory, prioritization steps and results. What do those steps look like? How did we get to the final results? What are those final results from that inventory and prioritization process? Presenting the proposed stormwater management actions for the Perrineville Creek watershed. So she'll be walking through each of the actions that have been identified as part of this process. And then we've got that formal Q&A and discussion portion of the evening as well. Any questions on or comments, Rebecca, Pat, or Mindy, on either the agenda or the workshop goals before we dive in?
No, that sounds good.
Yeah, we're set.
Great. So we do have a warm-up question for you all, warm-up exercise. So please hop over to your chat. And the question that we're asking you all to weigh in on as you think about this evening, think about the agenda that we've just brought forward to you all. What are you interested in learning about today? If you can just take a moment to put your response in the chat here. What are you interested in learning about today? Got from Selena, action plan for the Perrineville Creek watershed. Thanks for sharing. From Rick, we've got status of the previously identified flow reduction projects. From Jim, why has it taken so long and what has changed since the 2015 assessment? From Mikhail, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, plans for the Perrineville Creek watershed, how the salmon habitat can be restored. From Jean, are you finding more pollutants in some areas? From Diana, do you have a restoration plan for Perrineville Creek? From Marlene, how are you able to monitor for 6 ppd in the stormwater? Really just another moment here in case you haven't had a chance yet to finish your response, but keep them coming even as we keep moving in this agenda. From Bill, what's being done to stabilize the channel through the park? Final one, how do we choose Perrineville Creek? So we'll get into that as well. Like I said, keep them coming. But with that, I am going to turn it over to Rebecca to launch into the first agenda item and response to this question. What is the Edmonds Stormwater Planning Project? Rebecca?
Great. Thanks, Gretchen. If you want to hop on to the next slide. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of context behind the drivers for this project. So this is a project that is driven by the city's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, and that's written by the Department of Ecology, and it focuses on the municipal stormwater system. There's a set of stormwater planning requirements within that permit that requires the city to complete a water health assessment that was conducted and completed in March of 2022. Select a priority watershed, which was completed last year in June of 2022, and then develop an implementation plan or action plan for implementing actions to make improvements in that watershed. And that's required by the end of March 2023. So that's the one that's coming up that we're talking about today. Throughout the project, we've had a variety of public input. Some of you may have participated last year in the public workshops. Last year, we had 2 workshops in February 2022, and we also had a story map and public survey posted at that time. We've updated the story map and survey, and we'll have that up for comment after this meeting. And we're requesting responses by March 8th. You'll hear that date a few times throughout the presentation, just to remind you that's 2 weeks from today. So we want to make sure that we get additional comments through that survey by that time. So we've had a variety of public input throughout the process, and we definitely incorporate that into our recommendations for the plan. So the next slide covers the schedule. As you can see here, as I mentioned, we started with the story map and survey in January and February of last year, and then we had 2 public workshops in February 2022. We completed the water health assessment, meeting the permit deadline by the end of March last year, and selected the priority watershed, which is the Perrineville Creek watershed that Mindy will be walking us through that process, also meeting that permit deadline of June 2022. And we're here today for the public workshops. We had one this afternoon around lunchtime and have this one this evening. If you know other folks, other neighbors or residents that are interested in finding out more, we will be posting the recording of just this portion of the workshop so others can view that and have access to that as well if they weren't able to make it today. The public survey will be closing on March 8th, as I mentioned, and then we'll be working on wrapping up the implementation plan by the end of March. And that's also a permit deadline that we need to meet for the Department of Ecology. I'm going to pass things off to Mindy now to walk us through the planning process conducted to date, some key terminology, past results, and present the identified actions that we'll be putting forth in that implementation plan or action plan.
Thank you, Rebecca, and let's dive right in. We'll start with some terminology so we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. Starting in the water terms such as waterway. Those are the waters used by aquatic life, wildlife, and the community, including marine water or Puget Sound, freshwater, or streams and lakes. Watershed, I sometimes flip over and call it a basin. A watershed, this is the land area contributing to a waterway. Another term, receiving water, where stormwater ends up. Puget Sound, our streams, and our lakes. Next slide, please. So let's move out of the waterways and onto the landscape. Hard or impervious surfaces. These are surfaces such as roads, parking lots, driveways, sidewalks, and roofs that prevent water from soaking in. Ecosystem. This is a natural environment utilized by wildlife, aquatic life, and people. Stormwater, water that meets hard surfaces. The stormwater system, that's the drainage conveyance such as pipes and ditches transporting stormwater. Next slide. So what is the journey of rain across our Edmonds landscape? Well, rain falls and lands on forest, athletic fields, rooftops, and pavement. From there, some soaks into the ground or directly enters waterways. But much of the water frequently enters catch basins, pipes, vaults, and other stormwater infrastructure. And finally, at the lowest elevations, enters a lake, stream, wetland, or the Puget Sound. Stormwater carries pollutants and can damage ecosystems with uncontrolled erosive flows. Next slide. So how were watersheds prioritized for this permit required planning? Next slide, please. Well, planning takes many forms and is subject to a variety of drivers: transportation, utility system improvements, or land use. This planning process and action plan is guided by the stormwater permit language and an ecology guidance document. These documents are clear that the driver for this planning is watersheds and waterways health. So the steps used were first to assess all watersheds using existing data about waterway health, development, and stormwater influences. Second, move forward with the candidate watersheds. Third, conduct a more detailed analysis on these candidate watersheds. Fourth, select the priority watershed. And fifth and last box is the new information on what you'll hear today. You'll hear about the identified actions for the Perrineville Creek watershed. So let's begin with a review of the first 4 boxes of how did we get here, which was completed last year between January and June. Next slide. To conduct this planning, we were guided by the relationship between ecosystem health and development. Our developed lands and ecosystems share a strong and repeatable relationship. Puget Sound studies show that as development increases, ecosystem function decreases. When we began the process of selecting a focus watershed, we identified that a watershed with these characteristics would benefit most from an action plan. A moderate level of development compared to the other Edmonds watersheds. Moderate waterway health, meaning that water quality was fair or moderate so that the waterway would respond favorably to supplemental actions. And application of actions would more likely result in ecosystem lift. Next slide. So this is the framework that we used. An extensive inventory of the watersheds and data was organized in 3 general categories: water use importance, water and habitat condition, development and growth. Then watersheds were ranked. Next, a second set of data was applied to the candidates, such as how much control does the city have in the watershed? Are there overburdened communities that could benefit from waterway projects? Could this plan build upon existing projects and provide additive benefits? and then public input. From there, one watershed was selected. Next slide, please. So this figure shows graphically how the process started with 9 watersheds, narrowed them down to 6, then 4, and finally the selected watershed. I want to emphasize that this is not to pick a winner or alternatively to ignore and abandon other waterways. It's about an assessment on a watershed scale required by the city's stormwater permit. Next slide. So this is the assessment map that we started with. Each watershed is a unique color. After the presentation, I encourage you to explore the Edmonds Stormwater story map to see all of the maps that have been created and zoom in for details. Click on watersheds and you can see detailed information about each of those watersheds in terms of water quality, percent impervious surface, all kinds of information has been collected for each of these watersheds. A link will be provided later in today's presentation. So the black outline is the city limits and the crosshatches, the urban growth area island. The assessment proceeded with 9 watersheds. So focus on the brown arrows. 3 were removed immediately as they were too small a size or a very small portion was located in the city of Edmonds: Deer Creek, Southwest Edmonds, and Lund's Gulch. Next, focus on the blue arrows, North Stream, Fruitdale Creeks, and Stilthouse Terrace Creeks watersheds. They were identified as higher levels of development and lower water use importance. So then they were removed from the selection process. 4 major watersheds of higher water importance remained in the process. This makes sense since these waterways support parks and public recreation, salmon runs, and native fish. The 4 candidate watersheds were Edmonds Marsh, the darker green, Hall Creek, Lake Ballinger in the orange, Perrinville Creek, pink color, and Shell Creek, a light lavender color. Next slide. So this table summarizes the final prioritization step: public input, social equity, in coordination with existing projects. There was high public interest in Perrinville, Hall Creek, Ballinger, and Edmonds Marsh, and public interest was less for Shell Creek. We looked at social equity in terms of overburdened communities. A higher environmental health disparity score correlates with lower positive health outcomes or other disadvantages. The results are shown in the second column. And finally, looking at building upon other investments, such as the retrofit projects and other projects going on in the watersheds. The city is active in the top 3 watersheds, but there is a greater level of effort in the Perrinville Creek watershed. Next slide, please. So with strong community support and a momentum of past and ongoing projects, the Perrinville Creek watershed was selected as the highest priority watershed. The watershed drainage area is shared by both the city of Linwood on the right and Edmonds on the left. Next slide, please. I moved ahead. Thank you. That map on the right will make more sense now. So you can see the watershed drainage area on the right, and it is shared by Linwood on the right and Edmonds on the left. And the solid yellow line generally bisects the watershed from the north to the south. Much of the land use is residential. There's some schools and other green spaces. Next slide. So with that, I'd like to pause for any questions in the chat, clarifying questions or thoughts of what I've covered so far of how we've gotten to where we are with selecting Perrinville Creek watershed.
Any questions for Mindy? Pausing, checking the chat. We'll give you all just a few moments here to type anything in the chat if you have any questions related to what she's just covered.
So before moving into the stormwater management action plan, let's hear about the completed and ongoing projects in the Perrinville Creek watershed. Next slide. It's a long list of projects. Projects are located in both Edmonds and in Linwood. They address a wide variety of issues: flow control, water quality, and access to habitat. Flow control and water quality projects include rain gardens and completion of infiltration facilities. Habitat projects include those addressing the culverts. Next slide. So these are projects in progress. The city continues to work with homeowners to install rain gardens, address the culvert issues, and study the basin to identify flow control needs. And finally, that last line, with your input, the city is required to submit a plan to ecology that identifies additional actions to add to this list. Next slide. So what are the identified stormwater management actions that we're considering? Next slide, please. The permit designates 3 categories of stormwater management actions. First one, stormwater facility retrofits. These are construction projects or feasibility studies. The second one, land management strategies. So programs or policies addressing land use or zoning. And then stormwater program enhancements. These are public education and operations and maintenance activities that are above and beyond the stormwater permit requirements. The guidance is pretty clear that in-water work such as culverts or anything within the stream area is not included in this plan. This plan is focused on stormwater problems on the landscape. Next slide, please. So when hearing about these actions, consider the target problems and how each action can help mitigate stormwater on the landscape to either infiltrate water, reduce pollutants, or control flows. Next slide. So let's begin with the stormwater retrofit projects that have been identified. Next slide. 2 areas are identified for neighborhood scale right-of-way rain garden projects to control flow, clean the water, and potentially infiltrate runoff. The 2 areas under consideration are shown in the map on the right. They're the areas outlined in teal. We call them RP1 for retrofit project 1 and RP2 for retrofit project 2. These projects incorporate a community outreach component to inform and involve residents affected by this project. Next slide. So here's a closer look at the opportunities identified. The project would first be conducted as a feasibility analysis with the community outreach component. The green lines are right-of-way areas that are under consideration. So you can see these maps up more closely when you go to the story map website, and you can see if your street or road is involved in what's being considered here. Next slide. Let's move on to land management strategies. They're policies or programs that alter land use, zoning, or management. Next slide. So the first one is the city is considering strengthening stormwater design requirements in redevelopment situations. Current city code requires 50% retrofit on remaining hard surfaces during redevelopment. They're considering stricter flow control standards than what is in the current code for new and redevelopment projects. Next slide. The next action is for the city of Edmonds to work with the city of Linwood to find ways to control runoff from existing development in Linwood's portion of the watershed. Next slide. The next one is to identify what we call de-pave projects. So identify hard surface areas such as sections of parking lots or other paved areas that are no longer of service to the property owner and explore ideas for removing this pavement and replacing with infiltration or flow control. Once areas are identified, discuss these areas and options with the landowners. Any future work would be voluntary by the property owner. Next slide. And the next action is to encourage streamside landowners to make improvements in the stream buffer habitat area and runoff, and also make improvements on their property for managing the runoff. So the action is to develop educational resources, conduct outreach, and implement a boots on the ground technical assistance program. Next slide. So the last set of actions are stormwater program enhancements above and beyond the current stormwater permit requirements. These are related to public education, outreach, and system maintenance actions. So let's start with the first one. Next slide. So this is for homeowner rain gardens to provide workshops and technical assistance for constructing rain gardens. Both Linwood and Edmonds operate active programs in partnership with the Snohomish Conservation District. So this action is to continue to provide workshops and technical assistance to property owners to construct rain gardens on their property. So the picture on the left is a rain garden under construction, and the picture on the right is a planting party of a nearly complete rain garden. Next slide. Another action for the public is to provide the opportunity for community members to for the rain barrel events, annual rain barrel events in partnership with Snohomish Conservation District. So this event provides an opportunity for the community to purchase rain barrels at a low cost, and they can use those to conserve water resources and learn about stormwater runoff at the same time. Next slide. The next action is to address water quality issues from pet waste. So it's to implement a social media campaign to raise awareness and promote pet waste pickup. Next slide. And here's another water quality addressing issue is to develop and implement a natural yard care program. Use social media and other educational materials to encourage less use of chemicals or other natural lawn care practices for good water quality. And the last action identified, next slide, please. This is to train city staff on green stormwater facility maintenance. So as the city acquires more of these kinds of systems, these roadside rain gardens and other bioretention systems, is to receive additional training on how to maintain these, because we know that good maintenance of these systems results in these systems functioning at their best. Next slide. So this is a summary of the list of identified actions that we've just presented, that working with the city that we've come up with. And I'd like to take this time, if there's any questions or clarifying questions that you would like to put into the chat at this moment.
Any clarifying questions before we formally move into the Q&A on that portion? You've got the whole list of the projects in front of you on the slide. Just want to pause here before we head directly into the Q&A. We've got a question from Jim. What metrics are being used for success?
That's a really good question. So it's for success, it's tracking the projects and the implementation of the projects, but also the city is looking at updating the Perrineville Creek Basin stormwater flow reduction study and updating that study, which is based on stream flow metrics and how much flow needs to be controlled to better management of that stream. Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, since we're just in the planning phase, we don't quite have all the performance metrics yet, but that's definitely great to think about and what success looks like and how much of this would be implemented. So we're looking at kind of shifting things into things that would be done sooner and things that would be done later. And we'll take that into account as we're shifting things around and looking at what to prioritize and how to track those actions. So thank you for that comment, and we'll come up with some ideas on how to track the success of the plan.
Great. Thanks, Mindy and Rebecca. Great question. So we've got another question in the chat from Selena. Great to partner with Linwood. And then the question here is, how is Snohomish County Parks and Rec involved since it's within the project area?
Snohomish County Parks and Rec, I'm not sure. So Pat, what is?
I think we might just be talking about the Snohomish County, just in general, Snohomish County, not so much Parks and Rec, but the part of the county that actually monitors the park. So for instance, like the South Snohomish County Park that Perrineville Creek runs through. So yeah, they could be looped into this process as you know our projects take shape. Currently, this is just a City of Edmonds a formality we conduct for the permit. So there's no need to bring them in at this point, but this is not to say that it can't happen down the road when projects begin to actually start taking shape.
Thanks, Pat. Do you have another question in the chat here related to erosion? So I'll read this. Perrineville Creek currently has serious excess flow and severe erosion problems that exist in the creek in our backyard. How will you fix this? Rain barrels and rain gardens don't seem like enough to undo what's been done.
Go ahead, Mindy. That's fine.
Oh, okay. It really is going to take a lot of effort in a lot of different areas in order to control the flows. And there's been very good progress made. The flow reduction study identified areas where water could be infiltrated, areas where it's less likely, where water is less likely to be infiltrated, but then also now and in the future is looking at areas where you can detain flows. But you're correct, we have higher flows. It's you know, our rain patterns are changing. We're getting some really strong rain events, and it's going to take a lot to control the flows in Perrineville Creek watershed. It's highly erodible, steep drainage, and there's quite a few other drainage in the Puget Sound that are very similar. It'll take a lot of work, but there's a lot of work that's been done, and there's a lot of work that's being planned for now and into the future. I'll just hand it over to Pat if you want to say anything more.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. So I don't want to echo Mindy again, but I will say she alluded in her earlier slides that working with Linwood is going to be a big part of this. And yeah, I mean, I don't see another way to fully realize some of these projects unless we truly work with the stormwater team in Linwood as well. So so when she says there's going to be a lot of work involved, that's almost code for working with another municipality that has a lot of interest and acreage to this drainage basin. So so yeah, it's years in the progress, but starting the discussions now and identifying this particular drainage basin is good. So we're on our way.
Yeah, and when we think about one rain garden here, one rain garden there, it doesn't seem like very much, but when rain gardens are clustered, there's efficiency in installing them, whether they're clustered on the private property side, 5, 6, 7 properties in a row, or if it's stretched down in the right-of-way area that's currently just a grassy ditch. As much water as we can either hold back or infiltrate piece by piece at a time, that's going to contribute to controlling the flows.
Thanks for adding that. So we've got a couple of comments in the chat, sort of +1ing or echoing the importance of cooperating and coordinating with Snohomish County. We have a question from Natalie. How can I stay updated on the projects chosen, and how can I participate in those involving homeowners, community members in the future?
I'll start with how you can stay updated is by going to Edmonds webpage and visiting the story map, and also getting on Edmonds listserv so that you receive notices. And then I'll hand it over to Pat.
Yeah, no, you're dead on. Yeah, paying attention to the local online newspapers such as My Edmonds News or the Beacon, participating in this. You know, I love receiving emails from my local residents, so my contact information will be available at the end, but always getting in contact with me so I can send out my personal email list regarding projects, and just our social media. We do have a pretty active Facebook page that you can learn about projects. All of our major projects that are in right-of-ways usually get a little bit of press time just to let everybody know what's happening. And we sort of cross-pollinate between the Parks and Rec page and the City of Edmonds government page. So always make sure you like both of those pages. But yeah, we always like to talk about great things that are happening in Edmonds. So we do like, you always like to hear about that stuff. So we try to put it out as much as we can.
Thanks, Pat. And you'll see that Rebecca put a link to the project website in the chat here, and that's where you can sign up for some of these updates. And then we have a comment from Rick: because there is vastly more impervious area already built than will be constructed through future development, it seems imperative the greater effort be placed on retrofitting, encouraging private property owners to act, certainly beneficial, but increased certainty of near-term progress in flow reduction. We will need significant public investment to transform community drainage systems. And then offers a good example, Seaview Park infiltration system project.
Yeah, I think,
I can take that one.
yeah, Jerry.
From Rick. You're right. The thing about Perrineville Creek watershed is if you compare it to other watersheds in the city, it has less impervious surface than a lot of others. But because, as Mindy mentioned earlier, the stream itself is very steep, so you get high velocities, and the creek bed is very erosive and crumbly. So we kind of picked a hard one here because of those two factors in the creek. But you're right that the vast majority of the development in the basin occurred before there were stormwater controls required. And so all those properties and the city streets just drained directly into the storm system, which goes directly into the creek. So retrofitting, which means taking existing infrastructure and making it better to reduce flows, is a key part of this.
Thanks for adding that. We've got a couple more questions in the chat here. So one from Jacob: has there been discussion on flow and erosion control and how invasive plant species have a negative impact? And then bringing up a couple of examples of those invasive plant species being English ivy and blackberry bushes.
Yes, that has been discussed. When we were talking about this, the streamside landowner technical assistance, a piece of that is identifying invasive species, how to remove those species permanently, and then what to replace them with. And so that's part of that one-on-one, boots on the ground kind of technical assistance, because it's not easy to do. And it really helps to have someone right there saying, you need to pull that out by the roots, you have to bag it and get rid of it, and then do this and prepare the area for these kinds of streamside plants. So yes, we have talked about invasive species.
Thanks, Mindy. Another question in here about volume controls from Diana. There are many catch basins and storm drains in the Perrineville area, both Edmonds and Linwood, that drain directly into Perrineville Creek. Can these be equipped with volume controls and oil screening devices to control water surges and chemicals that go into the creek?
Yeah, that kind of retrofitting at the end of the pipe is challenging. Sometimes you don't have room to work in that space. And it's a matter of looking at all those outfalls and prioritizing what you can do in that space and what would benefit, or should you work upstream from that outfall and control the flows. So that's part of that evaluation of what water is going where, and identifying the places, the best places to control flows and hold water back versus doing something at the end of the pipe. Did anybody else want to add?
I can add on to that one a little bit. I think sometimes just the catch basin retrofit can be really tricky just because there isn't that much storage space within a catch basin. So it is hard to capture flow there. And some of the issues we see with the quick filters that you pop in is that they require a lot of maintenance. And so there are some other considerations when doing kind of catch basin scale retrofits. So like Mindy was saying, putting something else in the watershed that can both capture flows and provide water quality treatment is usually a better solution for both maintenance and for capturing those flows as well. Pat, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
I'll just say that many larger developments, multifamily houses, condos, apartments, things like that, new or semi-new, do have on a smaller scale oil water separators and flow control devices. So this is a thing we actively do, and it's built into all of our new and redeveloped construction projects. So they are monitored and controlled on smaller development scales, but when you're talking about 10, 15, 20 developments all in a small area, then you are actually controlling some pollutants as well as flow control on a larger scale. So, and the city does have a program to actively monitor those, check those for inspections, and make sure that these different businesses and properties stay in compliance with their pollution strategies.
Thanks for adding that. We've got a comment in the chat from Joe, and then we are going to move to the poll. We've got a question for you all that we'd like you to weigh in on. So from Joe, under stormwater flow management actions, is the diversion structure under the Perrineville Post Office being considered? I'm going to quickly weigh in on that, Mindy, before we transition over to the poll.
I can take that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can take it on. So diversion, I believe diversion structure was looked at in the 2015 flow reduction study, and we didn't go very far with it because it was brutally expensive to take water from the post office all the way down 76 and find a spot to dump it into the sound. Personally, I'm not a big fan of diversion structures because although you're taking water out of the creek, and which may help the erosive flows, you're actually giving the city a license to just directly dump pollutants right into Puget Sound. So the diversion structures are kind of a double-edged sword there. It'll probably come up again. We're going to redo our flow diversion study, and we'll put it back on the table again and see where it goes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, and then we've got a question in here from Andrea, and then, like I said, we will need to wrap up. I see another couple of questions in the chat as well. Maybe we can respond via chat to those as we move to the poll. So a question from Andrea, what about putting in stormwater retention ponds? Mindy, is that you?
Yeah, I can go ahead and talk a little bit about that. For stormwater retention ponds, you need space. And so if you can find space, that would be great. It's a great way to hold back water, but you need space. And so we often look at schools underneath their athletic fields. We look for space and to put those in. So that's part of identifying where you can retrofit. And if someone else wants to jump in, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, because space is limited, that's kind of where we see rain gardens fitting into the puzzle. We think of those as sort of almost mini retention ponds. You know, the rain gardens are aesthetically beautiful when they're put in, and they infiltrate the rainwater. But during those rainstorms, they are holding that water. Rain gardens stay dry for a good part of the year, and then as soon as it rains heavy, they take all that water and hold it like a retention pond. And then instead of on a larger scale, we're talking about just smaller scales. I will add though that the city of Edmonds is installing these on much larger scales now, 1,000 feet at a time. We took an entire city block and we built a 1,000-foot rain garden over in the Sierra Park neighborhood, and we're going to echo that project again on 83rd, one block west, this coming year. So yeah, like Mindy said, to struggle to find space, we're going to do it on smaller, more right-of-way type levels.
Thanks, Pat. And then we've got a couple more questions in the chat there. Maybe you can just respond to them via the chat, as we do want to give you all ample time to fill out the poll. And this list that you see in front of your screen is the top actions, or all the actions the top actions, right? That Mindy walked through and she explained what each of these were. And in just a moment here, Brent is going to launch a Zoom poll, and we're going to ask you, it's going to let you pick more than 3, but we're going to ask you to pick your top 3 actions that are most important to you. So as you take a look at this list, which top 3 actions really rise to the top for you? Give everybody a minute or 2 here to respond to this poll via Zoom, and it should have popped up in your screen.
And just to add, Gretchen, this is Brent. Sometimes you don't see all the lists, so you can scroll down on the right. If there's a little scroll bar, if you're not seeing the entire list.
Yeah, great call out, Brent. So every single bullet that you see on the screen is also part of the poll that Brent launched. And if you don't see it, as he mentioned, please use the scroll bar, the gray scroll bar on the far right of the poll. Got a few of you that still haven't voted yet, so we are going to give a minute or 2 to respond. If for whatever reason the Zoom poll is not working for you, please feel free to put your choices in the chat as well. Looks like we've got 6 more people that need a little more time. I see a couple of comments in the chat related to the poll. We need to focus on any actions that will help prevent the problem. My choices aren't on your list, and we've got a pathway for that we'll talk about in the next steps. Feel free to put your choices also in the chat as well if you're not seeing them on the list. Two more people that need just a little more time, so about another 30 seconds here, then we'll unveil what came out on top. We've got a 2-way tie here, so looking for those final 2 people to potentially break the tie. All right. So we'll go ahead and close the poll, and we can share the results here. So the ones that came out on top, we've got strengthening stormwater design requirements for redevelopment, working with the city of Linwood to prevent flows in the upper watershed. So those are the top 2. And then not so close, second or third and fourth, we've got a 2-way tie here, identifying hard surface areas where pavement could be removed, and then providing technical assistance to streamside landowners. So ones that rose to the top. And with that, I keep going here. Moving into what's next, and seeing a couple of comments in the chat as well related to are there additional pathways? Can I add additional actions? And we are going to get into that as well. And so as more questions in the chat come in related to the overall project, project team, feel free to answer them in the chat as I keep moving into what's next. So here we've got the timeline that Rebecca walked through at the beginning of the presentation here, and you'll see where we are, which is the second of 2 public workshops. And we hosted one at noon today, same content as we walked through with you all. The survey closes, the public survey closes on March 8th. So if you haven't had a chance yet to take that survey, please do so. And Rebecca's going to put that link in the chat again, just as a reminder. And at the end of March, which is just around the corner here, the implementation plan will be complete. And so just the last couple of steps here, and you'll see that Rebecca just went ahead and put that link in the chat. And that's both to the survey as well as the story map. It also has other relevant documents that we think are of use to you all, resources related to this project, this effort, the workshop slides from last year around this time, as well as once we get the tonight or this afternoon's presentation up on the website, that will be coming soon as well. Again, cutting out the portion of the discussion, just leaving the presentation slides and getting that up to the website. So if there are friends, family that have not yet, that weren't able to join today at either of our time slots, please direct them to the project website shortly, as they'll be able to see that presentation momentarily in just a few days here. It also, that project website hosts a story map that Mindy walked through and referenced throughout the course of her presentation, as well as that public survey that closes on March 8th. And so here's a little bit more about the public survey. So this is where you have an opportunity to list any other strategies or actions if you think that there are strategies and actions that are not showcased on the list that Mindy walked through. The survey is an additional opportunity to share them. And also it's an opportunity to add any areas for consideration for potential stormwater facility retrofit projects. So really looking to you all, boots on the ground, to help provide some valuable input into potential locations for the stormwater facility retrofit projects. Anything more on the public survey that you want to highlight, Rebecca and or Mindy?
No, you covered it well. Thank you.
Great. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat for closing remarks and also a request for providing responses to a 5-question poll, and he'll give a little more context into that. This poll, the results will not be shared, but are supporting documentation, required documentation for this effort. So Pat, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Gretchen. So yeah, in closing here tonight, thank you for taking time out of your nights to join us, join our consulting firm, City of Edmonds staff. This has actually been the second of 2 workshops today, and we've had great turnout. So thank you, Edmonds residents. I hope you know, it's fun getting involved in things like this and learning about City of Edmonds processes. As Gretchen did mention, there's a 5-question poll that's up. I do encourage you to fill this short survey out that's been posted in hopes that the city better understands our demographics. This is required for the city to track, and this information, as Gretchen said, is not shared. It's kept internally, but it helps us understand our demographics in Edmonds and who attends you know, meetings like this. And you know, so I also want to ensure in next slide that my contact information is available for you to jot down or screenshot. Either way, I'm always available for questions, thoughts, concerns regarding this process, or really any sort of stormwater and environmental questions you may have, not just dealing with the Perrineville Creek watershed, but Edmonds in general. So, and then usually for a lot of the more detailed programs or technical assistance, Jerry Schuster, our engineer, is always available for that as well. So, so please use us as resources. We're here to answer questions. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and end this workshop, and thank you everybody for joining us.
We'll go ahead and keep the poll open for another couple of minutes here. Recognizing that some of you all may be kind of midstream in that poll. As we're able to keep answering the questions in the chat as well. A minute left before we formally close the poll and end the meeting. Echoing Pat's thanks. Thank you all so much for carving time out of your day and your active participation in this workshop tonight. Does look like we've got one more person that's completing the survey. So once we get to 12 of 12, Brent, let's go ahead and end the poll. 11 of 11. There we go. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night. And we will be in touch. Please check out the website. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
let's go ahead and save the chat, Brent.
Okay.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Get out. Talk to you everybody later.